Hey guys, tonight we are traveling back to a world before the idea of history even existed. A time when memory was made of mud, and words were the only invention that could outlast death. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, tell me where you're watching from, and what the temperature is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes to a pale horizon, a place where the air feels heavy with dust and dawn. The sun hasn't quite broken through yet. It's caught somewhere below the edge of the world, turning the sky the color of unbaked clay. The ground beneath you is soft, pliant, still damp from the river that curves lazily nearby. You can smell its slow breath, silt, reed, fish, and the faint sweetness of decay. Everything here smells of life trying to become permanent. Somewhere to your left, you hear the slap of water against the banks of the Euphrates. It's a rhythm older than song, the same sound that has shaped human hands and houses for 10,000 years. You kneel and touch the mud. It yields, leaving your fingerprints behind. It's a simple gesture, just a press of flesh against earth, but in this place, that act will soon mean everything. The people who live here will discover that when the river retreats, it leaves behind not just water and silt, but the perfect medium for eternity. You can see them now in the distance, figures bent low in the morning haze, gathering reeds, mixing straw, kneading wet clay with bare feet. It's quiet work, rhythmic and unhurried. They don't know it yet, but they are building the first data storage system in human history. Every handful of clay, every pattern of lines, will one day carry the voice of a world long gone, pressed into permanence, baked by sunlight and time. The village isn't much to look at. A scatter of huts built from the same earth they stand on. The walls shimmer slightly in the heat, as though unsure where the ground ends and the sky begins. But there's a hum here, a feeling of deliberate motion, of beginnings that don't know their beginnings yet. Smoke drifts from a kiln pit where pottery hardens, the air thick with the scent of burning reeds and damp earth. Beyond it, you can see something strange rising from the flat plain, a stepped platform, crude but enormous, its sides built from sun-dried bricks. It's the embryo of a ziggurat, though no one calls it that yet. They just call it the high place, the spot closest to the gods. A child runs past you, barefoot, carrying a basket of small, wet slabs. They're not toys, they're tablets, square, palm-sized, still slick from shaping. Each one is a blank thought waiting to be written. The child disappears into a hut where two adults sit cross-legged, styluses poised. Their tools are sharpened reeds cut at an angle perfect for carving wedges. The marks they make are precise, deliberate, repetitive. It looks almost like art, rows of tiny bird tracks running across mud. But this is something far more dangerous. This is the moment where memory stops depending on flesh and becomes something external. You watch as the man presses a symbol into the clay, a curved wedge, a short line, another wedge at an angle. It's not a word, not yet. It's a number, grain counted, goats tallied, debts recorded. The birth of writing isn't poetry, it's paperwork. Yet hidden in that bureaucracy is something transcendent, the idea that time can be held still. These tablets will outlive everyone who touches them. In 5,000 years, someone will dig them up, brush away the sand and hear these same thoughts whispering through the silence. The Sumerians don't call it immortality, but that's what it is. The clay dries in the shade, pale and unassuming. Each tablet looks like nothing more than a flattened loaf of bread. But look closer. The symbols shimmer faintly in the half-light, each wedge catching the sun like a tiny mirror. You realize that this isn't just documentation. It's the world's first form of artificial intelligence. Each mark holds information independent of its maker, waiting to be decoded by another mind. When the scribes die, the tablets will keep speaking. They don't just record transactions, they record thought. You walk toward the river again, feeling the heat rising off the mud. The reeds sway in slow unison, whispering against one another. This is where the idea of permanence was born. From the rhythm of water and the stubbornness of earth, the Sumerians learned to use what the river gave and took away. Every flood left behind more clay to build, more land to farm, more reason to measure. And so they measured everything: grain, livestock, rainfall, the favor of gods. Numbers became prayers, and prayers became policy. By midday, the light is merciless. The horizon wavers, dissolving into heat mirage. In the distance, you can see a line of oxen dragging wooden sleds laden with bricks, not for homes, but for something grander. You follow them toward the rising structure at the city's center. It's the temple complex, the heart of Uruk. The air here smells of resin and sweat. Men and women move like ants, stacking bricks, smoothing plaster, murmuring chants as they work. Above them, the tower climbs slowly, each layer smaller than the one below. The priest overseeing it wears a robe dyed deep blue with lapis pigment, a color that catches the light like a fragment of sky. He turns and speaks to a young scribe beside him, who takes notes on another clay tablet. Instructions, perhaps, or prayers disguised as construction orders. You step closer and realize that the temple isn't just a monument. It's a machine. Every corridor, every stair, every altar is designed to regulate the city's relationship with its gods. The first human bureaucracy of heaven. Offerings go up, blessings come down, and in between stands a wall of tablets, each one inscribed with divine bookkeeping. There are lists of who donated what, when, and how much was owed in return. There are hymns written in perfect parallel lines. There are astronomical records tracking the dance of stars. Knowledge here isn't free. It's taxed, counted, and stored. You stand before one tablet half buried in straw. The symbols on it are simple but elegant. A cluster of marks arranged around a larger one. It's a list of barley rations. But there's something strange about the pattern. It's not random. It repeats in cycles, matching the lunar calendar. The realization dawns slowly. These people have begun to link time to quantity, the heavens to human behavior. It's the beginning of mathematics, the point where the sky becomes a ledger and the gods become accountants. As the day fades, the heat softens. The clay walls radiate warmth, glowing orange in the low sun. Somewhere in the distance, a flute begins to play, a hollow, haunting melody that seems to echo off the mud brick walls. You follow it through the winding alleys until you find its source. A group of scribes gathered outside a small house, their tablets laid out before them. They're reading aloud, reciting the words etched into clay, letting sound restore what symbols have taken. The language is ancient and harsh, full of breathy consonants and long liquid vowels. You can't understand it, but you can feel it, a rhythm that feels both alien and familiar, like a heartbeat you've forgotten you had. The lead scribe pauses and holds up a new tablet, freshly dried. He reads slowly, reverently. The others listen. It's not about grain this time. It's about kings, floods, and gods who walk among men. You recognize names that will echo through millennia. Gilgamesh, Enki, Inanna. The shift is happening right in front of you. Writing is no longer about survival. It's about meaning. Words that once counted rations now count souls. The clay that once remembered trade now remembers dreams. Night falls like ink. The sky over Uruk fills with stars, cold, brilliant, unblinking. From here, the constellations look almost close enough to touch. You can imagine the scribes studying them, drawing invisible lines between lights, turning them into signs and stories. Somewhere, a priest climbs the unfinished ziggurat and offers a bowl of oil to the gods above. The flame flickers in the wind, mirrored by the fire below in the hearths of thousands of homes. For a moment you can see it all, the symmetry between heaven and earth, between divine thought and human handwriting. You pick up a small fragment of clay near your feet. It's cracked, weathered, unreadable. You brush the dust away and trace the grooves with your finger. Even after thousands of years, the marks still hold their shape. You can feel the intention in them, the pressure of a hand, the weight of meaning. Somewhere in that texture is a whisper from the first writer who ever lived, calling across time to anyone who will listen. You close your eyes and hear it, the faint echo of a reed pressing into wet earth, the first heartbeat of human memory, the clay that remembered never forgot. You wake again, this time to the heat of morning, already creeping across the plain. The light has turned golden, the color of ripened barley, and the air hums with flies. The world feels busier now, louder, heavier, the sound of civilization settling into its rhythm. Somewhere nearby, a bell made from a hollowed shell rings out, summoning workers to the granaries. You can smell fermenting grain, the sour sweetness of abundance controlled. What began as simple counting has become a system. The Sumerians have built a world that can be measured, weighed, and recorded, a civilization that exists because someone bothered to write it down. You walk through narrow streets packed with people. Clay brick walls rise on either side, carved with faint patterns that catch the sunlight. Each home bears the same scent: smoke, bread, sweat, and a hint of river mud. You pass a group of women kneading dough on stone slabs, their arms dusted white with flour ground from barley. A small boy sits beside them, tracing shapes in the dust with a stick. The lines he draws look oddly familiar: wedges, angles, tiny footprints of a language still learning to speak. You watch him press the stick down a little too hard, and it breaks. The women laugh softly, but you see something in the boy's face, curiosity mixed with awe. He's not just playing, he's experimenting with the alphabet of reality. Further along, the smell of fish grows stronger. You've reached the market, a sprawling space of stalls made from woven reeds. Everything is organized by texture and sound. Grain sellers scoop their wares with hollowed gourds, their voices calling out measurements in a sing-song rhythm. Potters display rows of clay jars, their surfaces etched with symbols describing volume and purpose. You pause at one stall where a merchant and a scribe are arguing over a tablet. The merchant gestures wildly toward a pile of copper ingots. The scribe frowns, and then carefully adjusts a mark on the clay. One stroke changes the value of an entire shipment. One wedge can alter destiny. You realize the scale of this invention. Writing isn't just language, it's law. These people have turned sound into authority. Each tablet carries weight greater than any sword or army, a power that doesn't decay when the speaker dies. You imagine the first argument over authenticity, the first fraud, the first debt that could be enforced by marks in mud. Civilization is no longer about who can lift the heaviest stone, but who can hold the stylus steady. At the edge of the market stands a small shrine shaded by woven mats. Incense drifts upward in thin, lazy curls. A priest sits cross-legged before a stack of tablets, reciting names and offerings. The smoke stings your nose but smells faintly sweet. Cedar, myrrh, perhaps a little dried fish oil. Around him, people bow and leave small tokens: bread, beads, tiny jars of oil. The priest isn't looking at them. His eyes are on the clay. Each gift he receives is pressed into record, one wedge at a time. Even faith must be balanced against the ledger. You wander beyond the market. Drawn by the sound of hammering, the streets widen into a courtyard where builders work under the unrelenting sun. They're crafting new tablets, hundreds of them stacked like bricks along a wall. Each is the same shape, the same size, the same formula. You pick one up and feel its weight, surprisingly heavy for its smallness. The scribe beside you nods approvingly. Good clay, he might be saying. This will last forever. He gestures to the kiln nearby, a pit roaring with flame, its rim blackened by years of use. Inside, half-baked tablets glow red like miniature suns. You realize you're looking at the first archive in history, a place where information is literally forged in fire. Above you, the ziggurat of Uruk looms higher than before, its walls climbing toward the pale blue sky. The sound of chisels echoes down from the upper levels. Workers carry baskets of bricks on their heads, their bodies moving in slow, practiced rhythm. The stairways are steep, each step large enough to make you pause for breath. When you finally reach the platform near the top, the view steals what's left of it. The city spreads out in every direction. Canals glittering like veins, fields divided into perfect rectangles, the Euphrates gleaming in the distance. Everything is geometry. Everything is order. You feel for a moment like you're standing inside someone else's equation. A priestess waits near the altar, her robe shimmering with gold-threaded patterns that catch the sun. In her hands, she holds a small clay tablet, newly inscribed. She doesn't speak as she sets it down on the stone surface, beside a bowl of oil and a cluster of reeds. The air smells faintly of copper and ash. You glance at the tablet, a grid of symbols repeated in rhythmic sequence. They look different from the ones in the market below, more abstract, more deliberate. You realize they're not about trade or taxation. They're about the sky. The priestess lifts her gaze upward. The stars are still faintly visible in the morning light. Venus, perhaps, or Ishtar's planet, shimmering like an afterthought of night. The symbols on the tablet correspond to it. Positions, intervals, predictions. This is astronomy. Hidden in prayer, the Sumerians have begun charting the heavens, not for wonder but for timing, to predict floods, to measure months, to know when to plant and when to mourn. Every act of devotion doubles as a calculation. The gods may rule the world, but the scribes have learned to schedule them. You sit beside the altar and watch the priestess pour oil onto the tablet. It fills the grooves, making the wedges glisten like tiny stars. The reflection dances across her face, turning her features soft and timeless. She begins to chant, the words rising and falling like the wind off the river. You can't understand the meaning, but the rhythm feels mathematical, a steady pulse that matches your heartbeat. In this moment, religion and science are the same thing, patterns carved into clay, whispered back into the air that birthed them. The heat deepens. You find yourself descending the steps again, your hand brushing against the rough bricks. Each one is stamped with the symbol of the king, a small star-like shape, pressed before the clay dried. Even construction here is documentation. Nothing is anonymous. Every wall, every tablet, every boundary carries the mark of authority. You realize how fragile it all is. A single flood, a single war, and the record could vanish. Yet somehow, impossibly, it won't. The clay will endure. The walls may crumble, the gods may fade, but the words will wait. Back at the riverbank, the light has shifted to that strange silvery hour before dusk. Workers wade in the shallows, scooping up handfuls of mud to start the next day's tablets. Children chase eels through the reeds, their laughter mingling with the hum of insects. You crouch and pick up a lump of clay yourself. It's cool to the touch, pliant, full of tiny pebbles. You press your thumb into it, just once, and watch the marks stay. It feels like cheating time, like leaving a message for someone who hasn't been born yet. You think about how this civilization will fade, how the language will die, how the cities will sink beneath sand, how the very river that made them will shift its course. Yet the tablets will remain. They'll lie buried for millennia, waiting for sunlight and human curiosity. Someday another hand will hold them, just like yours, and trace the same symbols. They'll read names like Enmerkar and Lugabanda and Gilgamesh and wonder if any of it was true. The sun sinks low. The air cools. You watch the light slide across the clay in your hand until it disappears. The river murmurs softly beside you, eternal and unconcerned. You understand now why the Sumerians worshipped it, not as a god of chaos, but as the keeper of memory. Everything that lives here owes its existence to this muddy, shifting, patient thing. You set the clay down gently on the ground and step back. Tomorrow someone will find it, press a stylus into it, and give it purpose. Tonight, it's just waiting. Waiting, like everything else in this world, to be remembered. You wake to the sound of reeds whispering outside and the smell of smoke curling low across the floor. The air feels different today, heavier, filled with the rhythm of people who've learned to make permanence out of impermanence. The city of Uruk is alive now, fully awake, breathing through its streets and canals like some great living animal. The clay walls, the people, the sound of water lapping against barges, they all move with a single pulse. You step outside your shelter and see a crowd forming along the wide street that leads toward the temple. Men carry baskets of clay tablets, freshly dried, stacked in neat piles. Others shout instructions, their voices echoing off the mud brick walls. The air shimmers with heat, turning the horizon to liquid, and through that heat, rising above everything else, stands the ziggurat, its stepped terraces glowing gold in the morning sun. It looks less like a building and more like a thought that decided to take shape. The people here call it Eanna, the House of Heaven. It is dedicated to Inanna, goddess of love and war, fertility and destruction, a reminder that even divinity in Sumer comes with contradictions. The priests say the tower reaches up to touch her domain, but in truth it pulls the sky down into the earth. Each step is a compromise between heaven and mud, a ladder made of faith and physics. You join the slow procession climbing its side. Each person carries something: tablets, offerings, jars of oil, small figurines carved from stone. The scent of burned cedar fills the air as you ascend. The walls shimmer with painted patterns, spirals, suns, serpents. You brush your fingers against them and feel how the pigments still cling, oily and warm, made from crushed lapis and ochre mixed with animal fat. These colors aren't decoration, they're devotion turned tangible. Near the top, a young scribe sits cross-legged before a low table. His hair is tied with a strip of reed, his hands stained grey from clay dust. Around him are stacks of tablets, some baked, some still damp. He looks up and nods once, inviting you to watch. With a reed stylus he begins to write, not words of trade or ration this time, but something different. The marks come slower, more fluid, almost musical. You realize you're watching poetry being born, the first written verse in human history. He reads softly as he presses each line. The Queen of Heaven comes dressed in storm. Her voice is the river. Her touch is the grain. The language sounds like stone and breath and water all at once. It feels less like someone speaking, and more like the earth remembering. The scribe doesn't smile, doesn't look proud. He's too focused. To him this is not art. It's ritual. He is binding feeling to matter, ensuring that even love will one day be archaeology. You look at the tablet and notice something almost invisible. A small correction, a smoothed out mark, a hesitation caught forever in clay. It's humbling, this glimpse of error preserved. The first poet's rough draft will outlive empires. You think of how fragile it must have been to invent beauty in a world that only cared about grain and taxes. Yet here it is, music frozen into matter. A priestess approaches, her robe rustling like wind through dry grass. She kneels beside the scribe, takes the tablet carefully, and places it inside a small wooden chest lined with bitumen. The air smells of tar and roses. She seals the lid with clay, pressing her own mark, a star into the soft surface. The chest will be buried later in the temple vault, alongside hundreds of others. It's not meant to be read again soon. It's meant to be eternal. You follow her inside the inner chamber, where the light dims and the temperature drops. The air is thick with incense and old air trapped behind stone. Rows of clay shelves stretch into shadow, filled with tablets stacked edgewise like books. Some are so ancient the writing has faded to faint ghost lines. The silence is heavy, almost sacred. You realize this is the world's first library. The priestess gestures toward one of the older shelves. You step closer and see that the tablets there are different, larger, heavier, covered not in orderly lists but in dense clusters of symbols. Some look like stories, others like equations. You run your hand above them without touching, as though they might still be hot. She whispers something you can't quite understand, but the tone carries reverence, maybe even fear. These are the records of beginnings. She explains through gesture, the myths that describe where humans came from, how cities began, why gods bleed. She points to one in particular, a cracked slab, its edges worn smooth by centuries. The marks upon it are unmistakably deliberate, written by a careful, practiced hand. It tells of gods descending from the sky to shape men from clay, to teach them to till and build, to speak. You recognize the story's pattern, echoed later in so many faiths. Creation by molding divine descent, a garden turned city. Here it sits, the root system of human mythology, pressed into river mud and left to bake. You can almost hear the rhythm of that first myth being read aloud to a gathering of listeners sitting on reed mats, their faces glowing orange in firelight. The storyteller would chant, the audience would murmur, the words would ripple through time like wind through water. The myth was more than religion, it was infrastructure for meaning. Outside, thunder grumbles faintly. Though the sky is clear, the priestess looks toward the sound and smiles as though she recognizes it. To her, thunder isn't weather, it's conversation. The gods are listening. You follow her back to the temple entrance. From this height, the city stretches far and shimmering. You can see the canals like silver threads, the granaries like small hills, the endless horizon of reeds and sand. Smoke rises from thousands of hearths, each one a reminder that humanity's oldest miracle isn't fire itself, it's our insistence on keeping it alive. Down below, the streets thrum with evening life. A drummer beats a hollow log in a repeating rhythm. Traders shout over the noise of oxen and carts. Somewhere, a child laughs. The world below doesn't know it's being recorded for eternity. They live, work, and love beneath a sky already immortalized in clay. You begin your descent, each step echoing against the bricks. Halfway down, you pass a wall engraved with hundreds of small, neat wedge marks. A long list of names. At first you assume it's another ledger, but the repetition catches your ear. You realize it's a census. Every living soul accounted for, each existence compressed into strokes of clay. For the first time in history, no one is entirely forgotten. You touch one of the names. The surface is rough, but the lines are still sharp. Somewhere beneath the dust of millennia, that person still exists. Someone who once ate barley bread, drank beer from a clay cup, listened to rain on the roof, loved and feared and dreamed. They are here, silent but present. You understand suddenly that writing didn't just preserve civilization, it gave ordinary life a form of eternity. As night falls again, the air cools and the wind carries the scent of damp earth and smoke. You walk toward the riverbank where the scribes wash their hands each evening, the clay swirling off their fingers back into the water that birthed it. The circle feels complete. The same material that remembers everything also forgets nothing. It returns patiently waiting to be molded again. The moon rises, pale and immense, its reflection rippling across the Euphrates. You sit in the quiet, the sound of frogs and distant voices fading together into a single hum. Somewhere in that hum is the first alphabet, still speaking. The clay under your feet is full of ghosts who never truly died. You lean back on your hands and let your eyes drift shut. The world around you is ancient, but it breathes with a strange familiarity. You realize that every word ever written since then, every poem, every law, every whispered confession, still traces its lineage to this same riverbank, to this same stubborn miracle of clay and thought. Humanity learned to speak forever, and it began here beneath a sky that still glows like wet earth in the moonlight. You wake before sunrise to the dull rumble of thunder over the plain. The air feels heavy and still, full of dust and expectation. Somewhere in the distance, the river murmurs as if it already knows what's coming. You stand outside your small shelter, and look toward the horizon. Low clouds move in slow sheets of grey, rolling over the endless flatlands. This is not the soft rain of the north. This is the kind that rewrites geography. You can smell it before it arrives. Wet clay, iron, ozone, and rot. The scent of the flood. You walk toward the higher ground, toward the ziggurat that towers above the city. The priests are already awake, moving through the courtyards with jars of oil and bundles of reeds. They speak in low voices, checking the sky every few moments. The people of Uruk know what these clouds mean. The Euphrates and Tigris give life, but they also take it away. Once the rivers rise, the streets will disappear under brown water. The canals will overflow, carrying silt, dead fish, and the ruins of everything too heavy to move. The flood has always been part of their calendar. The scribes track it, the priests predict it, and the people endure it. But this time the air feels different, charged, tense, like the city is holding its breath. You follow a line of workers toward the storage pits, where grain is being sealed in clay jars. Each jar is marked with the same sign, 3 wedges inside a circle. The symbol means preserve. Even the most practical act here carries a layer of superstition. Preservation is worship. By mid-morning, the sky turns a strange greenish color, wind whips dust through the alleys, and the river begins to rise, slow but relentless. You can hear it long before you see it, a deep, continuous roar that vibrates through the ground. The first wave hits the lower fields, washing over rows of barley and scattering the clay boundary markers. Farmers shout and run, driving their animals toward higher ground. Children carry baskets of tablets, holding them above their heads like sacred relics. You follow them to the edge of the temple complex, where dozens of scribes are gathered. They're moving quickly but calmly, stacking tablets on wooden platforms, wrapping others in straw, coating the oldest ones in layers of clay slip for protection. They know from generations of floods that not everything will survive, but some will, and that for them is enough. The gods can destroy a city, but the words might endure. Rain begins to fall in heavy, solid drops. It strikes the baked earth like hammer blows, sending up little explosions of dust. The smell of it is overwhelming. Petrichor mixed with smoke and decay. Within minutes, the narrow streets are rivers. People wade through waist-deep water, holding on to each other, shouting orders that the wind tears apart. You take refuge beneath the overhang of a brick wall, the water swirling around your ankles. From here you can see the ziggurat glowing faintly under flashes of lightning. It stands like a massive spine, rigid against the storm. The priests at the top light torches, their flames flickering wildly in the wind. They raise their arms to the sky, chanting to Enlil, god of storms. The words are rhythmic, repeated again and again, not pleading, just procedural, like accountants closing a ledger at the end of a bad year. The chant carries over the sound of rain and thunder. You can barely make out the phrases, but the meaning is clear. This has happened before, and it will happen again. By nightfall, the water reaches the steps of the temple. The city has become a mirror of the sky, black, endless, full of movement. The torches on the ziggurat flicker like distant stars reflected in the flood. You climb higher with the others, your feet slipping on the slick bricks. People are silent now, listening to the sound of roofs collapsing somewhere below. You glance down and see a clay tablet float past, its symbols still sharp and clear beneath a film of mud. It drifts a moment, then sinks without a ripple. You wonder if someone will find it again in another age, another world. Inside the temple's inner chamber, the air is thick with heat and smoke. The priests have sealed the doors, leaving only a narrow vent near the roof. Dozens of tablets lie stacked against the walls, each one a record of crops, births, deaths, and offerings. The water won't reach this high, not if the gods keep their word. A young woman kneels near the altar, pressing the last of the clay seals into place. She doesn't look frightened. She works with the calm of someone fulfilling a duty older than fear. The flood lasts for days. The city disappears beneath the surface, but the ziggurat endures, its upper terraces floating above the endless brown sea. The people survive on stored grain, rainwater, and faith. When the sky finally clears, the sun returns like a second creation. You walk outside and see nothing but horizon. No streets, no fields, no landmarks, only the tips of the highest walls poking through the retreating water. The reflection of the sun turns everything to gold. It looks peaceful, almost beautiful, if you don't think about what's gone. Weeks later, the land begins to dry. The mud cracks, splitting into patterns like veins on old skin. People dig through it for what's left of their lives. Children find pottery fragments, small idols, a few bones. Then someone shouts. A tablet has been found, wedged between two stones. It's coated in silt but intact. The symbols on it are still legible, a record of rations, dates, names. The flood has erased everything, but one story has survived. The discovery spreads quickly. The priests declare it an omen, proof that memory itself is blessed. The tablet is carried in procession to the temple, washed, oiled, and set beside the altar. From that day on, a new ritual begins. Every spring before the floods, the scribes bury fresh tablets beneath the ziggurat steps, sealing them in clay jars and marking them with the sign for preserve. They no longer write only for trade or order, they write for survival. You sit by the riverbank one evening, as the new season begins. The sun dips low, the water calm again, the city already rebuilding. The first frogs return, their calls echoing through the reeds. You look down at the cracked earth beneath you, and realize that beneath those layers of mud lie hundreds, maybe thousands, of messages from those who refuse to vanish. Each one is a heartbeat trapped in clay, waiting to be found again. You think about how every generation since has written its own version of the same story. The flood that destroys, the record that survives, the reminder that nothing is truly permanent except the desire to be remembered. The Sumerians didn't just invent writing, they invented the possibility of resurrection. Every rediscovered tablet is a voice returning from the silence. The wind moves through the reeds, dry and whispering. You can almost hear those voices in it. Names, numbers, fragments of prayers, all rising together in the same ancient rhythm. You close your eyes and listen until the sound becomes indistinguishable from your own breathing. The clay remembers. It always has. You wake to the smell of dust and ash, the scent of drying earth after a storm. The flood has receded, leaving behind a world rewritten by mud. The streets of Uruk are still scarred and soft underfoot. The river has changed its course slightly, cutting new paths through the fields, swallowing some, exposing others. The city begins again from the ruins, just as it always has. The Sumerians do not see disaster as an ending. They see it as a reset, another accounting cycle in the endless balance sheet between humans and gods. The people move with a sense of purpose that borders on reverence. They collect fallen bricks and set them aside for rebuilding. They scrape silt from their thresholds and shape it back into usable clay. Every handful of dirt feels valuable here, as if even ruin can be recycled into memory. The scribes return to their benches, the styluses back in their hands. You walk past one of them, and he looks up long enough to smile. His hands are cracked and caked with mud, but his movements are steady. The flood hasn't shaken his faith in the written word. If anything, it has deepened it. You watch as he carves into a new tablet, his strokes slow and deliberate. The lines describe the event that nearly erased his world. The marks are sparse but powerful, the word for water repeated, then rising, then again. There is no exaggeration, no embellishment, just the plain truth. These people never claim that the gods saved them. They only note that they survived, yet the act of writing turns survival into scripture. In another part of the city, artisans repair the temple walls. The surface still glistens faintly with salt, a memory of the floodwater. The priest overseeing the work carries a small wooden box. Inside it are the tablets that survived, warped, scorched, but readable. They are treated like relics carried through the streets so people can touch them for luck. One of the priests explains that the tablets are not sacred because they are old, but because they endured. In a land where even the gods can drown, endurance is the only form of holiness that matters. You follow the workers to a large open square near the temple complex. A platform of new clay bricks has been built, wide and low, surrounded by scaffolding made of reed and rope. The heat of the sun presses against your back as you climb to the top. There, dozens of men and women sit in rows, each with a tablet in front of them. It is not a ritual, it is an operation. The entire city is rewriting itself. Every inventory, every debt, every record lost in the flood must be recreated. You stand among the first bureaucrats of human history, watching as they bring civilization back into alignment through words. The sound of styluses striking clay is steady and hypnotic. Tap, press, lift, tap, press, lift. It sounds almost like rain, a quieter, controlled version of the same force that nearly destroyed them. Every mark is a defense against chaos, an act of order performed by exhausted hands. You realize this is not just administration. This is their way of fighting entropy. A scribe nearby pauses and looks up at you. He gestures to the sky, then back down to his tablet, as if to say that what the heavens destroy, humans can record. It's a statement of defiance, but also humility. The gods make floods. Humans make archives. Between those two acts lies the fragile thread of civilization. You walk to the edge of the platform and look down at the river. The surface is calm again, reflecting the city like a mirror. Boats glide slowly across it, carrying bricks and grain. On the far bank, farmers begin to plant new barley. They use wooden plows, each one pulled by a pair of oxen. You can hear the creak of the harnesses and the soft grunt of the animals. Every furrow they carve is another line in the same story, written not in clay but in earth. At night, the air cools. The city hums with quiet activity. Potters firing their kilns, smiths hammering bronze tools, scribes working by oil light. You stand near one of the furnaces where a group of workers are heating clay tablets. The glow of the fire lights their faces, turning sweat to silver. One of them holds up a finished piece and sets it aside to cool. You can see faint images pressed into the surface, not letters but small figures and patterns, cylinder seals. These are the signatures of the ancient world, rolled across wet clay to authenticate a document. Each seal carries the name and symbol of its owner, carved in reverse so that when pressed it reads correctly. A young apprentice offers to show you one. It's made of limestone, about the length of your thumb, strung on a cord around his neck. The image is intricate. Two figures standing on either side of a tree, their hands raised toward a star between them. You turn it in your hand and realize how advanced the craftsmanship is. These people don't just write, they design systems of identity, proof, and trust. Each seal is a portable passport, a mark of who belongs and who does not. You hand it back, and he smiles before slipping it over his head again. Around you, the workers keep rolling their seals across the tablets. Merchants, priests, farmers, all imprinting themselves into history, one rotation at a time. The result is almost musical. The presses and rolls, the quiet clatter of clay, the faint hiss of the fire. It's the soundtrack of civilization. A few days later, you find yourself inside a small chamber deep within the temple. The air is cool and still, heavy with the smell of baked clay and oil. Shelves line the walls, each stacked with hundreds of tablets. A man kneels in the corner, cataloguing them by shape and content. He works with the concentration of a surgeon, marking each one with a small code at the edge. When you ask what he's doing, he simply points to his chest, then the shelves and says one word, memory. It's clear he doesn't mean his own. You realize what this room is, an organized archive, a library long before the idea of one existed. The Sumerians have invented the concept of external memory. Thought now lives outside the skull, distributed among shelves, protected by ritual and fire. It is no longer dependent on breath or lineage. It can be lost and found again. You walk through the aisles, running your fingers along the edges of tablets. The surfaces feel rough, uneven, but the marks are clean. Some deal with trade, others with medicine, others still with omens, everything from the pattern of bird flights to the shapes of clouds. Knowledge here is not separated by category. Everything that can be known is written down, because everything might someday be useful. When you leave the chamber, the night sky above Uruk is bright and cold. The flood has become a memory, recorded in dozens of hands. The river runs quietly, carrying fragments of lost tablets downstream. Somewhere far away, those fragments will dry, harden, and wait for someone else to find them. Thousands of years later, you look back at the ziggurat, its steps shining under moonlight, and you understand the pattern that binds this civilization together. Disaster, documentation, renewal. It's not just their history, it's humanity's default state. You close your eyes and listen to the city breathe. The flood is over, but the clay still remembers. It always will. You wake again to the low hum of life returning. The city has survived, and with survival comes a new obsession. It is no longer enough for the Sumerians to record what happens. They have begun to wonder why it happens. The scribes are restless now, no longer satisfied with tallies and inventories. They turn their styluses toward the heavens, the earth, the invisible. You can feel it as you walk through the narrow lanes, a tension between faith and observation, between priests who see the gods in every gust of wind, and thinkers who suspect the patterns might be mechanical. At the temple school, the Edaba, young apprentices sit cross-legged on woven mats, practicing cuneiform signs on small tablets. Their instructor, an old man with a reed tucked behind his ear, walks among them, occasionally striking the ground with a stick when someone presses too lightly or too hard. You watch as he pauses beside one student and corrects a line, showing how a single misplaced wedge can change the meaning of an entire sentence. Writing has become a science. There is no art here, no poetry, only precision. In Sumer, the difference between knowledge and ruin is one careless mark. Outside, a small group of priests gathers under a shaded canopy. They speak in low voices, gesturing toward a set of freshly unearthed cylinder seals. The designs carved into them are intricate, tiny winged figures, wheels within circles, something that looks almost mechanical. The youngest priest traces the pattern with a trembling finger. He insists that the design represents chariots of the gods, vehicles that crossed between worlds. The older priests laugh quietly, but do not argue. They have learned that disbelief is dangerous. Every myth here begins as a record. You move closer and study one of the seals yourself. The carvings are astonishingly detailed, not random, not decorative. The wheels have spokes, the figures have helmets, and what might be flames emerge from beneath them. The priests store the seals carefully in a small clay jar and mark the outside with the sign for sky. They will be buried later in the temple archive, along with the other strange finds that don't fit the usual order of things. As you walk away, you pass a scribe seated on a flat stone. He is etching something larger than usual, a tablet almost the size of a door. The marks are arranged in columns, not lines. You realize he is copying a list of astronomical observations, planetary movements, lunar cycles, positions of stars. The Sumerians have become patient enough to measure time itself. He points at a star chart drawn beside him, simple dots connected by faint lines. You recognize one constellation, the Bull of Heaven. It will still be known by the same shape, thousands of years from now. You climb a slope just beyond the city where the air feels clearer. The noise fades until you can only hear insects and the distant rush of the river. At the top stands a small platform surrounded by clay jars and wooden rods. A priest astronomer sits in silence, watching the horizon. Beside him lies a tablet with careful marks showing the phases of the moon. He points toward the eastern sky, where the first faint light of dawn begins to appear, and then to a spot where Venus shines like a drop of molten copper. He gestures that the goddess has returned from the underworld. You realize you're watching the birth of predictive science, astronomy wrapped in theology. The sun rises slowly, flooding the plain with light. The priest bows, murmurs a short prayer, and then writes something on his tablet. The time, the position, the date. There is no separation here between faith and fact. For the Sumerians, to measure the heavens is to honor them. They don't see contradiction in it. They see order. By midday, the heat is oppressive again. The markets are crowded with people trading grain, fish, and oil. The air smells of salt and sweat. At one stall, a merchant demonstrates a new device, a simple set of weights and balances. Each piece is marked with symbols that match those on official tablets. The crowd watches in fascination as the merchant proves that numbers can enforce fairness better than any god. You realize how profound this is. The divine has competition now, and its rival is mathematics. Later, inside a shaded courtyard, a group of scribes argue quietly over a damaged tablet. You can see fragments of text across its surface, a story about gods who come from the stars, bringing wisdom and tools. One man insists it's a metaphor for knowledge. Another claims it describes an event, something real that happened long ago. The oldest among them listens in silence, then carefully breaks the debate with a single statement. Everything written in clay was believed by someone once. The room falls silent. They continue their work without further argument. As evening approaches, you return to the river. The water runs dark and smooth, reflecting the orange glow of the setting sun. Children play along the banks, tossing pebbles into the current. Each ripple fades as quickly as it forms, leaving the surface unbroken. You can't help but think of the tablets buried beneath the mud, entire civilizations sealed in silence, waiting. The idea feels too modern for such an ancient world, yet it fits perfectly here. You hear footsteps behind you. A young woman approaches carrying a basket of newly baked tablets. She kneels beside the water and begins lowering them in, one by one. The heat of the clay meeting the cool river makes a faint hiss. When you ask her why she's doing it, she shrugs. She doesn't understand the words on them, but she says the scribes told her the river keeps memory safe. When it floods again, the tablets will travel, scatter, and sleep until found. She calls it the journey of words. The sun dips below the horizon, and the first stars appear. The same priest-astronomer from the hill now stands nearby, staring upward. He nods once as Venus fades, marking the end of his observation. The Sumerians have begun to chart the rhythm of the universe. They can predict eclipses, track seasons, measure time in repeating cycles. But in their stories, they still insist the gods drive those motions by hand. It's a contradiction they seem perfectly content to keep. You return to the city through streets that glow with lamplight. Somewhere nearby, a kiln roars, drying tomorrow's tablets. The sound of it is steady, constant, like breathing. You stop and watch the fire through a crack in the wall. The heat shimmers, distorting your reflection in the glaze of half-finished pots. The workers move in practiced silence, their shadows flickering across the walls like living hieroglyphs. You realize that this city has become a kind of machine, every action a loop, every role defined, every story recorded. And yet, underneath it all, the mystery remains. The scribes can count stars, measure floods, and write the names of kings, but they still wonder what hand first pressed meaning into clay. You stand in that thought for a long moment, feeling the weight of continuity. The night deepens. A cool wind drifts through the alleys, carrying the scent of baked earth. Somewhere, a flute begins to play, a low, slow tune that bends and wavers. You walk toward it, past doorways lit by small lamps, until the music fades into the hum of the city. You pause once more by the river before returning to rest. The reflection of the moon trembles in the current, fractured but unbroken, just like the words of those who came before. The clay has learned to speak, and now it refuses to stop. You wake to the sound of footsteps outside, steady and organized. The air feels different today, not just hot, but efficient. The city of Uruk is no longer a scatter of huts and workshops. It has become an organism of systems. Canals run like veins, warehouses line the riverbank, and workers move in scheduled rotations. The smell of drying grain fills the air, mixed with the sharp odor of bitumen used to waterproof jars and boats. The scribes walk among them like quiet overseers, each holding a tablet, each checking marks and symbols that define what belongs to whom. Writing has become power, and those who control it have become something new. Not priests, not kings, but accountants of eternity. You follow one of them, a man named Shuba, as he moves through the busy marketplace. He wears a simple linen tunic and carries a reed stylus tucked into his belt. Every few steps, someone stops him with a question: how much grain is owed, how many jars of beer remain, whether the temple's storehouse is full. He answers without hesitation, flipping through a stack of tablets that hang from his arm in a woven sling. They're organized by symbols, not numbers, each tablet an extension of his mind. You realize that this man remembers more through clay than through thought. At the edge of the market, Shuba kneels beside a wooden table where two merchants argue over a shipment of copper ingots. One claims he delivered 10 loads, the other insists on 8. Shuba studies their tablets, then presses a new one between them. The marks he makes are quick, confident. His stylus scratches the clay with authority. When he finishes, he holds the tablet up, reads it aloud, and both men fall silent. The argument ends, not because one is right, but because the record now exists. The written word is final. You walk with Shuba to the temple's inner offices, a long hall lined with shelves stacked with tablets. The room smells of oil and smoke, the air heavy with heat. Assistants move along the aisles, sorting and indexing records. You notice the structure of the place, each section dedicated to a specific category: grain, animals, labor, debt. Civilization has invented filing. You think about how much of this is purely human. No gods here, no ritual, just process. This is where power begins to look familiar. In the corner, a group of scribes sit around a table covered with damaged tablets. They are working to repair them, filling cracks with new clay, tracing lost symbols from memory. Their leader, a woman named Ninara, explains that they're creating a master copy, a single record that will preserve all essential information in case of fire, flood, or theft. She says it like a prayer. Redundancy is devotion now. You sit beside her and watch. Her hands move with careful precision. Each stroke is measured, each symbol a piece of reality. She pauses at one line and frowns, muttering that the older record conflicts with a newer one. She doesn't mean philosophically, she means mathematically. The tablets disagree, so she resolves it the only way she can. She writes a third version and seals it with her own mark. Truth, here, is not divine revelation, it's consensus. Later that day, the temple accountant arrives, an older man with sunburned skin and a deliberate walk. He carries a heavy chest of silver weights and clay seals. Around his neck hangs a tablet smaller than his palm, glazed black and covered in fine writing. He places it before the high priest and reads it aloud. It lists totals, exports, deficits. Each word sounds like a verdict. When he finishes, the priest nods once and presses his own seal beside the accountant's. The transaction is complete. You understand then that this is not faith. This is governance. Religion has merged with record-keeping. Outside, the streets echo with the rhythm of civilization at full scale. Caravans from distant cities arrive with donkeys laden with lapis, ivory, and tin. Boats glide through the canals carrying timber from faraway mountains. The scribes record every exchange. For the first time in history, distance can be measured by trade, not by imagination. You can feel it in the air, the hum of an economy born from clay. In a shaded courtyard, children learn their first symbols under the watch of an older teacher. He draws lines in the dirt with a stick and has them repeat the marks on soft clay slabs. Their laughter fills the air as they struggle to make the wedges straight. He tells them that words are the most valuable thing they will ever own. You realize he's right. The children of scribes will never go hungry. Knowledge has become the first currency. Later, you find yourself at the edge of the city, near the storage fields. The wind moves through the barley in waves, and the faint sound of insects rises from the ditches. A line of workers carries baskets of grain toward the granary. Each basket is weighed, recorded, and sealed. The system runs like clockwork, efficient, relentless, impersonal. It's strange to think that what began as a few scratches in clay has built an empire of procedure. You wonder if any of them understand the scale of what they've created. Probably not. To them, it's just work. That night, in a quiet tavern lit by oil lamps, merchants drink barley beer from clay mugs. The walls are painted with faded scenes of animals and boats. A musician plucks a stringed instrument in the corner, singing a story about a scribe who angered a god by forgetting to record an offering. The crowd laughs, not out of fear but amusement. The story is absurd to them. The gods are no longer the ones who decide what is remembered. The scribes are. You leave the tavern and walk along the canal. The air is thick with the smell of water and smoke. The moon reflects off the surface, broken by ripples from passing barges. You stop and look down at the reflection, the city flickering upside down. Every light, every shadow mirrored. It feels familiar. The same symmetry the Sumerians always sought, balance between heaven and earth, between chaos and control. Only now the gods have been replaced by ledgers. In the distance you see the faint silhouette of the ziggurat, its terraces glowing faintly with torchlight. You know that inside, hundreds of tablets are stacked neatly on shelves, each one a fragment of order, each one a line between oblivion and permanence. It occurs to you that somewhere in those walls might be the first human thought that ever outlived its thinker. You stay there for a long time, watching the reflection of the city drift in the current. The clay that once carried prayers now carries policy. The stylus that once praised gods now enforces taxes. It is both progress and burden, the price of permanence. Humanity has learned how to be remembered, and it will never stop writing itself down. You wake to the sound of voices outside, not the low hum of trade or labor, but something heavier, chanting. The air is thick with smoke. The temples have begun their morning rituals, and you realize that the scribes are not the only ones who record. The priests write in a different language, one made of fire and ceremony. What they preserve is not commerce, but belief. Yet even that, here in Uruk, has been shaped by the same logic of clay. You walk toward the great temple at the center of the city. The steps are crowded with petitioners carrying offerings, jars of oil, baskets of dates, clay figurines shaped like men and bulls. They wait in silence as the priests move through them, collecting, recording, sorting. The process is efficient, almost industrial. Even devotion is itemized. For every offering, a tablet is made. For every blessing, an entry is marked. The gods receive their due in the same way the temple receives grain. Inside, the hall is vast and dim, the air heavy with incense. The stone floor is cool under your feet. Along the walls hang rows of polished bronze plaques, etched with symbols of divine decrees, commandments, prophecies, stories of gods demanding obedience and tribute. A group of young acolytes copy these plaques onto fresh clay, their styluses clicking in steady rhythm. You stand and watch one of them work. His tablet reads, "Men were made to serve the gods, to lift the weight the heavens could not." The words are neat, practiced, unquestioned. The priest overseeing them notices you and gestures toward a row of larger tablets laid out near the altar. They are cracked and old, their surface darkened by time. These are older stories, the ones not meant for public recitation. You kneel to examine one and recognize its symbols immediately. They describe the creation of humans, not from nothing, but from the blood of gods mixed with clay. The inscription is blunt. They shaped us to labor, to dig the canals, to bring water to the fields. It is not a myth of love or purpose. It is a contract. You stand back, and the realization settles in. To the Sumerians, humanity was not born free. It was born employed. The gods may have crafted the first humans, but the work never stopped. The priests say this arrangement is sacred. The scribes simply record it as policy. Either way, it defines everything. You leave the temple and walk toward the industrial quarter, where the smell of bitumen and burning reeds fills the air. Workers are coating boats, sealing them against leaks, preparing for the next flood season. The scene looks almost identical to the one described on the tablets inside the temple. It's hard to tell where myth ends and manual labor begins. You realize that for the people of Uruk, they are the same thing. Worship is work, and work is worship. Further ahead, you find a group of artisans shaping statues. The figures are human but stylized. Broad shoulders, wide eyes, hands clasped in perpetual prayer. Each one is hollow, built around a reed frame and coated in layers of clay. The artist explains, with gestures, that these statues stand in the temples for those who cannot be present to pray. You stare into one of the unpainted faces, its mouth open as if caught mid-breath. The expression is serene, but also empty. These are not idols. They are surrogates, proxies of devotion. Humanity has begun outsourcing its soul. The heat rises, and you seek shade near a kiln where a young woman tends the fire. She fans it carefully, watching the color of the clay inside. She tells you that once the figures are hardened, they are painted with ground minerals. White for purity, black for silence, red for life. When you ask her why the eyes are so large, she answers simply, so they will always be watching. The gods require witnesses. As the afternoon passes, you wander back through the city. You notice more statues, in doorways, on altars, even set into the corners of streets. Their eyes catch the light, unblinking. The entire city feels like it's being observed by its own creations. You wonder if anyone finds that unsettling. Most seem comforted by it. In a world where disaster can strike without warning, being seen feels like protection. Near the edge of the city, you find another kind of record keeper, the judge. His office is a small open courtyard shaded by a woven mat. A handful of people wait their turn as he listens to disputes, each case recorded by a clerk beside him. When two men argue over land, he consults a tablet bearing the king's seal, then nods once. The matter is closed. There is no appeal. Law is literal here, not metaphor, not negotiation, but a sequence of marks in clay. If a mark exists, it is truth. If it does not, there is no argument to be made. You realize the connection between temple, market, and court. Everything is based on inscription. The gods require written offerings. The merchants require written proof. The judges require written precedent. Words once pressed into mud have more weight than any human voice. The entire civilization rests on that assumption, that permanence equals justice. By evening, the streets are quieter. Smoke rises from hundreds of ovens, and the air smells of bread and oil. You sit on a low wall and watch the people pass by. Workers, scribes, children, priests. Each one carries a fragment of clay somewhere on their person. A seal, a tablet, a charm. The material that once shaped their homes now defines their lives. The city itself is an extension of that material. Every wall, every record, every belief baked into permanence. You look toward the ziggurat, its shape dark against the fading light. Torches burn along its upper terraces, flickering like stars trapped close to earth. Somewhere up there, priests are reading from the oldest tablets, reciting the terms of creation to keep the balance intact. You can almost hear their voices on the wind, repeating the same refrain, humans serve, gods rule, and clay remembers. The night deepens, and you walk back to the river. The surface is still reflecting the glow of the city. You kneel, scoop up a handful of mud, and let it slide through your fingers. It feels alive, almost warm. You realize that this substance, this mixture of earth and water, has been humanity's constant companion, from birth to burial, from house to tablet. Everything returns to clay. The Sumerians understood this long before anyone else. They saw no difference between creation and construction. Both required hands, patience, and the will to endure. You stay there for a while listening to the quiet. Somewhere downstream, a kiln door opens and the sound of fire rises into the night. You can picture it. Another batch of tablets hardening, another generation's thoughts locked into permanence. It feels both comforting and tragic, the certainty of being remembered, but only through the fragments that survive. The stars shimmer above you. Their reflection trembles in the slow current, and for a moment the world feels balanced again. Heaven above, clay below, and humanity suspended between them, always writing, always rebuilding, always waiting for the next flood. You wake to the sound of digging, slow, rhythmic strikes of metal against packed earth. The air is cooler now, the season shifting. Dust hangs in the early light, and somewhere in the distance you hear the faint crash of collapsing walls. It's not war or disaster this time. It's excavation. The city has grown so old that its own past has begun to surface. The new builders uncover the foundations of the old ones, and the cycle continues. The Sumerians rebuild atop their own ruins, turning history into architecture. You walk toward the edge of Uruk, where the digging is deepest. There, near a half-dried canal, a group of workers pulls chunks of hardened clay from the ground. Some are bricks from ancient walls, but others are tablets, their edges fused together by time. A scribe kneels beside the pit, carefully brushing dust away from the symbols. His movements are reverent, almost fearful. The marks are old, much older than anyone expected. You crouch beside him and look closer. The writing is familiar, but the syntax is strange. It belongs to a version of the language that no one alive speaks anymore. He looks up, eyes wide, and whispers a single word. Before you understand what he means. These tablets predate the temple, the current kings, perhaps even Uruk itself. They have found records from another age, an older civilization that vanished but left its memory in clay. The discovery spreads quickly through the city. Priests arrive, then scholars, then laborers who just want to see. The tablets are carried to the temple under heavy guard, laid out on reed mats under torchlight. Inside the hall, the scribes gather around them. You can see their faces illuminated by the flicker of oil lamps. The air smells of clay dust and smoke. They work quietly, tracing the symbols, murmuring translations to one another. You recognize fragments of stories. The same flood, the same gods, the same creation. The details differ, but the pattern is identical. Civilization has happened before, and it has fallen before. The realization spreads slowly, like a chill. A priest breaks the silence, declaring the tablets heretical, the work of false scribes or forgotten gods. But the older scribes shake their heads. The clay is genuine. The style of writing, the mineral composition, all unmistakably ancient. Someone lived here before the first city was built. Someone wrote before the invention of writing. Over the next weeks, the excavation expands. More tablets are found, each one buried deeper than the last. Some are warped from heat, as if exposed to enormous fire. Others are shattered, their fragments fused with ash and sand. A few bare drawings that make the priests uneasy, images of star maps, of strange winged beings, of machines that no one recognizes. The scribes record everything, making copies before the originals crumble. For the first time, they are not just documenting life, they are documenting mystery. At night, you sit by the fire as the scholars debate. Some say the tablets are warnings from the civilization that came before. Others believe they are messages left for the future. meant to be discovered only when humanity was ready to understand them. A few suggest something more radical, that the cycle of cities rising and falling is not punishment but inevitability, that civilization itself is designed to forget and rediscover over and over again. You listen, feeling the weight of that thought. Beneath your feet lies layer after layer of human effort, every era believing itself to be the first, every ruin becoming the foundation for the next. You realize that the Sumerians, with their records and temples and perfect ledgers, are just one layer among many. The permanence they worship is an illusion, but a necessary one. Without it, no one would bother to build. The next morning, a new discovery halts the work. A collapsed chamber is uncovered deep beneath the temple, sealed by bricks stamped with unfamiliar symbols. The priests are hesitant, but curiosity wins. They pry open the entrance, and a rush of cool air escapes, carrying the dry scent of centuries. Inside lies a small room lined with shelves, each filled with tablets. Unlike the others, these are arranged with care, not scattered, not buried. The chamber was deliberate. It was meant to be found. You step inside. The air is still and heavy, but it feels untouched, like a tomb that has been waiting for someone to arrive. The walls are covered in faint carvings, constellations, rivers, spirals. On one tablet near the center, a single line of text catches your eye. It reads, "The gods departed, but their work remains." The scribe who finds it reads the line aloud, and the words echo through the chamber. The others stare in silence. The meaning is unclear, but the implication is enormous. The gods, it suggests, were not eternal. They left, or perhaps they were human all along. The priests forbid further reading, but the scribes have already begun copying. You can see it in their faces, the same mixture of fear and fascination that always follows discovery. Once knowledge is uncovered, it cannot be buried again. The tablets are hidden from the public, locked in a sealed room within the ziggurat, but copies circulate quietly among the scholars. Over time, the details will change, the names will shift, myths will grow, but the seed is planted, the idea that the gods might have walked, built, written, and vanished, just as humans will. As the days pass, life in the city returns to normal. The markets reopen, the canals fill, the sound of work resumes. Yet something has changed. You can sense it in the way the scribes look at their tablets, more aware now of what they cannot control. They still record the movements of grain, the rise of water, the decrees of kings, but a shadow lingers behind every mark, the knowledge that nothing written can truly save them from oblivion. That night, you stand again at the edge of the excavation site. The pit is quiet, filled with shadows. The moonlight reflects off broken shards of clay scattered across the ground. You kneel, pick one up, and feel its rough surface under your thumb. The symbol on it is almost gone, half erased by time. You turn it toward the light, and the faint wedge still catches the glow. It feels alive, defiant. You set it back down gently. The wind moves through the ruins, carrying the smell of dust and ancient water. Somewhere in the distance you can hear the city's hum, the same sound that will one day fade, just as all others have. You think of the hidden tablets beneath your feet, the ones that spoke of cycles, of forgotten gods, of work that never ends. You realize the truth that no one in Uruk wants to face. The clay may remember, but memory alone cannot stop time. Still, the people will write. They will build, count, measure, and pray, because in the end, to press meaning into earth is the only defiance humanity has ever truly known. You wake to silence, the kind that feels deliberate. The city that once roared with labor now breathes more slowly. Uruk has aged. The bright certainty of its beginnings has been replaced by endurance, the quiet rhythm of a civilization that knows its own weight. The ziggurat still stands, though its edges are worn smooth by wind and time. The river still runs, but it has shifted again, curving farther east, leaving dry scars where the water once touched the city walls. You walk through streets half swallowed by dust and think about how much of the past lies beneath your feet. The scribes still work, though fewer now. In a courtyard shaded by reeds, an old man sits at a low table, surrounded by students. His hair is white, his back bent, his stylus moving slowly. Each stroke is careful, deliberate, as if he's carving against the wind. You recognize him, Schuber, the accountant you once followed through the market years ago. He no longer records trade or harvests. He writes history. His students copy his words, shaping each sign with reverence. You stand behind him as he inscribes a line, "We built cities so that the gods might find us again." He pauses, sighs, and adds another, "But they did not return." His students don't react. They've grown up in a world where the gods are quieter than before. The priests still perform rituals, but fewer people watch. The temple still burns incense, but the smoke rises to emptier skies. You wonder if faith has changed shape, from worship to memory, from commandment to curiosity. You walk down to the market and see the same stalls, the same worn faces, but everything feels muted. The old symbols remain, but they have lost their urgency. The merchants still weigh grain. The potters still spin their wheels, but the city no longer expands. Its energy has turned inward. The scribes now record harvest failures, taxes unpaid, names of men sent to repair canals that will soon run dry. The ledgers of eternity have become reports of decline. At the far edge of the city you find the new generation of record keepers. They work in what used to be a warehouse, now a library. Shelves of tablets rise from floor to ceiling, each marked with a small clay tag. The air inside is cool, still, heavy with the scent of dust and oil. A young archivist explains that they've begun cataloguing everything, not just current affairs, but old stories, myths, hymns, laws. They no longer know which will matter, so they preserve them all, in case, she says simply, someone needs to start again. She leads you to a smaller room, sealed with a brick door. Inside are the oldest tablets, the ones once forbidden, the ones that spoke of forgotten gods, of cycles and returns. They are kept here, wrapped in linen, guarded not by faith but by duty. She says they are too fragile to display, too dangerous to destroy. You realize that knowledge here has become both burden and relic. The Sumerians have reached the final stage of civilization, archiving themselves before the end arrives. Outside, the wind rises, carrying sand through the streets. The sound is constant, a low hiss that fills every corner. You watch as it coats walls, roofs, even the faces of the statues. The wide eyes that once stared in eternal prayer now look half blind under a film of dust. The city is turning back into the material that birthed it, clay to clay. You walk toward the river one last time. Its banks are lower now, the water shallow and sluggish. Fishermen stand knee-deep in the current, their nets thin and torn. Beyond them, the fields are cracked and grey. The air tastes dry, metallic. You kneel by the water and scoop a handful of mud. It crumbles in your palm, lighter than before, almost brittle. You realize that this river, this endless scribe, is beginning to forget. That night, in the heart of the city, the last great festival begins. The priests climb the ziggurat carrying torches, their silhouettes flickering against the dark sky. Below them, the people gather in the courtyard, singing the old hymns. The sound is thin but determined. You watch as they lift their hands toward the heavens, not expecting an answer, but performing the gesture anyway. It's habit, heritage, maybe even hope. When the chant ends, silence settles again, heavier than before. The next morning you walk through Uruk one final time. The sun rises behind a veil of dust. The streets are quiet except for the scratching of a few styluses. The scribes are still at their tables, pressing the last words into clay. One of them, a young man with sharp eyes, hands you a tablet still damp from shaping. On it is a single sentence. If you find this, remember that we once existed. He smiles faintly before setting it aside to dry. You know that someday someone will find it, maybe in a museum, maybe buried beneath centuries of soil, and they'll wonder who wrote it and why. You leave the city and climb the ridge beyond the fields. From there, Uruk stretches below you like a fossil. The pattern of streets, the shell of temples, the gleam of the ziggurat half buried in haze. It looks eternal, but you know it isn't. The flood will come again, the river will shift again, and this place will fade, yet the clay will survive. It always does. You turn one last time before walking on. The wind moves across the plain, stirring the dust into spirals. Somewhere in that shifting light, the memory of the city lingers, its tablets, its builders, its scribes, the first voices of humanity still whispering through the earth, still telling their story to anyone patient enough to listen. Centuries will pass. The words will sleep under sand and stone, waiting. Someday another pair of hands will uncover them, brush away the dust, and read. They will hear the same echoes you hear now. The hum of the river, the scratch of the stylus, the rhythm of civilization teaching itself how to remember. And when they do, they'll understand that nothing written is ever truly lost. The clay never forgets. The city fades behind you, shrinking into the pale distance until it becomes only texture, lines of dust, the ghost of a skyline, a faint mirage shimmering where the river bends. The sound of the water softens to a low murmur, steady and patient. The world around you feels wider now, slower, quieter. The wind moves in long, unbroken breaths across the plain, carrying the scent of clay and smoke and time. You walk without hurry, following the rhythm that has guided every step of this journey, the steady pulse of creation, the quiet erosion of everything made. The ground beneath you is layered with the remains of countless lives, homes collapsed into dust, temples melted into soil, words dissolved into silence. Yet somehow none of it feels gone. Everything once written still hums faintly in the earth, as if the clay itself remembers what it was meant to be. The sky darkens to a deep blue-grey, the first stars flickering awake. Their light feels ancient, reaching you across distances even longer than history. You think of the scribes watching those same stars, trying to measure their pattern, pressing their knowledge into tablets by the light of oil lamps. You realize that you're part of the same pattern, another observer, another recorder, another traveler trying to keep the story from ending. The air cools. You lie back in the sand and look upward, letting your thoughts drift. The night stretches above you like a tablet of endless black, the stars carved into it like symbols waiting to be read. Each one feels like a word, quiet, persistent, eternal. The river murmurs beside you, its current a soft repetition of all the stories it has carried and erased. For a moment you imagine the whole world breathing in rhythm, water and wind, time and clay, memory and forgetting. The Sumerians are gone, but their voices linger like dust on the air, faint but certain. You can almost hear them whispering, reminding you that everything built, everything written, everything loved becomes part of the same long sentence. You close your eyes. The sound of the river grows fainter, folding into the hum of the night. The warmth of the day fades from the ground beneath you. The stars blur, the wind slows, and all that remains is stillness, the soft, endless stillness that follows when words finally rest. Somewhere in the dark, the last spark of a torch flickers out, the clay cools. The story ends. Like a candle going out,